Hello, dear colleagues. The following talk, the universal multi-level relationship between the stochastic organization of genomes and the deterministic structure of DNA alphabets. All living organisms are endowed with the innate ability to perform actions of an intellectual nature. For example, a spider weaves a web with its end attached to random supports. Bees build honeycombs. Organisms devoid of nerve cells, such as mold fungi and slime mold, also have intellectual abilities. When creating artificial intelligence systems, one should look at the principles and patterns of genetic inheritance of such abilities from living nature. The talk is devoted to some of the results of such a peeping through the prism of algebra. The genetic as a science began with Mendel's discovery of the stochastic rules of inheritance of traits in experiments on the crossing of organisms. Many processes in living bodies are of a stochastic nature. The well-known expressions gene noise or cell noise reflect the fact that even genetically identical cells within the same tissue exhibit different levels of protein expression, different sizes and structures, due to the stochastic nature of interactions of individual molecules in cells. This stochastic nature of genetic process in the small does not interfere with the inheritance of the traits determined in the big. For example, fingerprints are different for all people, although fingers in general have a typical shape and composition. According to Mendel's law of independent inheritance of traits, information from the level of DNA molecules dictates the macrostructure of living bodies through many independent channels, despite wrong noises. Thus, hair, eye, and skin colors are inherited independently of each other. Accordingly, each organism is a machine of multi-channel noise and unity encoding. One of the examples of the connection between stochastic and deterministic features in biology is given by the phenomenon of biomechanics of movements by the classic of biomechanics Bernstein. The general target task of movement is performed exactly regardless of the inaccuracies of its constituent motor subtasks. For example, when repeating an exact hit with a hammer on a nail, each time a person uses different trajectories, speeds, and accelerations of body parts with a change in both the flexion angles in the joints and the activity of many muscles of each joint with many motor neurons of each muscle. The example shows that the intelligence of an organism works with the probabilistic characteristics of local movements of the body's links, giving out a deterministic general result of movement, hitting the target. The speaker is convinced that the knowledge of the laws of the dualism, probability versus determinism in biology is important for the creation of artificial intelligence systems of the next generation. The described phenomenon of biomechanics of movements belongs to the broad topic of Gestalt biology, in which stable holistic patterns are formed regardless of the variability of their constituent parts. For example, Gestalt psychology studies the innate properties of the brain to form holistic images that are relatively independent of their particular components. Thus, a musical melody is recognized by us even when it is played on different instruments and in different frequency ranges. This is inherited fundamental property of the psyche, to seek in a disparate whole. In biology, there are many other genetically inherited gestalt phenomena, morphogenetic, homeostatic, sensory, etc., in which a stable holistic pattern is realized in conditions of a wide variability of its constituent components. For example, the molecular composition of a living body is constantly changing while maintaining the shape of the body. Its proteins are involved in continuous cycles, life, death, of stochastic assembly and disassembly into amino acids. For example, the half-life of the hormone insulin in 6-9 minutes. In other words, genetically inherited parts of our body are constantly dying and reborn. According to the physiologist Lurvich, the main problem of biology is maintaining the shape with constant renewal of the substrate. Intellectual activity can also be viewed from the standpoint of Gestalt biology. In particular, the nests of some bird species are architectural masterpieces with an inherited integral form, intellectually woven from a variable set of random straws and other elements. All physiological systems are genetically inherited through their genetic coding. Therefore, one should look for the origins of this inherited Gestalt phenomena of physiology in the genetic system of DNA informatics. In the course of such searches, the speaker discovered that already in the information system of DNA molecules of the genomes of higher and lower organisms, universal Gestalt phenomena of their stochastic organization are embedded. Let us explain this. Genetic information on DNA molecules is written in a sequence of 4 nucleotides, molecular letters: adenine A, guanine G, cytosine C, and thymine T. DNA also contains alphabets of 16 doublets, 64 triplets, 256 tetraplets, etc. All these alphabets are represented in matrix form as members of a single tensor family of matrices, CATG in n tensor power. The columns and rows of these matrices of DNA alphabets are binary numbered based on molecular binary indicators of nucleotides. The columns are numbered with binary indicators: pyrimidine or purine. CT is equal to 1, A and G is equal to 0 in blue. And rows with binary indicators amina or keta. C and A is equal to 1, P and G is equal to 0 in red. For clarification, let us turn to the concrete DNA of the first human chromosome, which contains a sequence of about 250 million nucleotides. Calculating in this DNA the percentages of each member of the DNA alphabet of 4 nucleotides, we obtain a table of their probabilities. The next step, we represent the same DNA as a text of 2-letter words such as CA, TT, GA, etc., based on the alphabet of 16 doublets, and calculating the percentage of each of the types of doublets we get a table of percentages of 16 types of doublets. Similarly, presenting the same DNA as a text of 3-letter words and then as a text of 4-letter words, etc., we obtain the corresponding tables of percentages of kinds of endplates in this text, written respectively using the alphabets of 60 for triplets, 256 tetraplets, etc. For example, for a text of 3-letter words, we have a percentage of 64 triplets. According to this method, the nucleotide sequences in each genomic DNA turn out to be a whole bunch of parallel texts, each of which is written in its own alphabet of endplates, and the DNA as a whole appears as multilingual object. This method proved to be effective, leading to the identification of universal rules and symmetries of the stochastic organization of genomes. Taking this into account, figuratively speaking, any genomic DNA speaks many languages, is a polyglot. At first glance, the resulting sets of percentages of endplates and these endplates DNA text are quite chaotic. Moreover, the percentage of types of endplates in these texts depends on the order of the letters. For example, in the doublet text of the DNA under consideration, the percentage of doublets CG and GC of the same letter composition differs several times. Percent of the doublets CG is equal 1.01 and percentage of the doublet GC in 4 times more. But in this seeming chaos, there are many universal rules for endplates grouping that are valid for all studied genomes. I will give some of the examples of universal equalities for the sums of percentages of endplates using percentages in the DNA of the first human chromosome. Let us turn to the tensor family of matrices of DNA alphabets with binary numbered rows and columns. It turns out that in these matrices, any pair of rows and any pair of columns numbered with bit reversed sum numbers has with high precision the same sums of percentages of the endplates within each pair, although separate percentages in these rows and columns differ significantly. For example, in the case of a doublet text of the DNA under consideration, we have practically equal sums of percentages of types of doublets in pairs of columns and rows with reversed numbers, despite the fact that the terms in these sums are different. See that slide. In the case of a triplet text of the same DNA, we have equalities in this of the sums of the percentages of the types of triplets in pairs of columns and rows with binary reversed enumerations, though the values of the terms in these sums are different. See that slide. In general, in the genetic foundations of living matter, we are faced with a very special and universal type of regularly limited stochasticity. The randomness of alphabetic elements in the end text of genomic DNA of higher and lower organisms turns out to be limited by a set of deterministic numerical relationship between groups of endplates. This multi-layer vaguely reminiscent of polyphony in music. In our opinion, the understanding of this phenomenological dualism, probability versus determinism, in genetics will make it possible to understand much in the genetically inherited vital activity of living bodies. The described method analyzed the percentage of end text of the following genomic DNA: all 24 human chromosomes, all the chromosomes of Drosophila, mouse, worm, many plants. Thirdly, 19 genomes of bacteria and archaea, or many extremophiles living in extreme conditions, including, for example, radiation with a level exceeding 1,000 times fatal to humans. Due to this, the rules and symmetries of the stochastic organization of genomes, which are common to all these genomic DNAs, and therefore are candidates for the role of universal genomic rules, have been identified. The universal Gestalt rules and symmetries identified by the author in the stochastic organization of DNA of genomes of higher and lower organisms indicate the existence of non-trivial algebraic invariants of a globally genomic nature, which remain unchanged over millions of years of biological evolution, during which millions of species of organisms die off and new ones appear, although locally genomic sequences are modified by mutations, natural selection mechanisms, etc. This seems to be connected with the question of the origin of life, since these patterns are presented also in archaea and bacteria. The discovered universal Gestalt rules of the block stochastic organization of genomic DNA indicate the existence of quantum mechanical long-range links in the nucleotide DNA sequences. They are used to create new approaches to artificial intelligence and a new view of organisms as algebraic entities associated with the formalisms of quantum informatics. And some conclusions. Genomic DNA are packets of parallel text, each of which is written in one of the end-plate alphabets of DNA. Secondly, there are universal numerical rules in the stochastic organization of the DNA of the genomes of higher and lower organisms. Thirdly, the identification of these universal rules is important for understanding the dualism probability versus determinism in biology and the phenomena of Gestalt biology, as well as for the development of new approaches to artificial intelligence systems. Thank you very much for your attention.